everyone, for being here. Heidi, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Heidi. Roll call, please.
Trustee Lindy. Here. Trustee Cook.
Here.
Trustee Karen.
Here.
Trustee Walter.
Here.
Trustee Montalto.
Here.
Trustee Karen. Here. President Marcus.
Here.
And four.
Okay. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. No public hearings, no appointments. We get a proclamation for David put together?
You know, we did work on that. Not sure where it's at, but we do that one.
No, okay. Yeah. Well, Dave Rose is retiring from Engineering Enterprises, and it was the intent to pass a proclamation in honor of Dave Rose. So we'll get it another night. But we really appreciate Dave's service to Sugar Grove and his work at Engineering Enterprises, and wish him the best in his retirement. So,
When's he leave, Sean?
the 30th is or 31st.
He's worked with us since 1996 with the village, and that time we got the resolution appointing he was our village engineer. Dave was our first one worked with staff, and I apologize so much for having it here this evening. It's all written up and ready to go. Dave's just been great, and we wish him and Dolores the best retirement.
Yeah, and he's been helping out with Corn Boil, hopefully keep it
Corn
continuing.
boil and
Chamber,
food pantry.
so he'll be missed. Okay, any public comments on items scheduled for action? Under tonight's consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes, vouchers, treasurer's report, ordinance amending the Sugar Grove Industrial Redevelopment Project number 1, ordinance amending the tax increment financing district number 2, ordinance adding parcels to TIF 2, ordinance for TIF redevelopment project, a ordinance amending village code regarding minutes, a resolution regarding permit fee credits, and then we'll discuss Mallard Point. Any comments on any of those items?
Sorry I missed the meeting, last meeting anyway. I was not here, but I did listen to the audio portion, which was really good. My comments are regarding the TIF areas and the change in those areas. I believe you're possibly voting on that tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I didn't hear in the presentation were the details and the impacts of the TIF. And what I want to do is not to be boring, but I'm going to read some of the captions right from the report so that it's understood that it is a product of the city and from Moran Development, not something that I'm making up. Basically, what this tells me is the village of Sugar Grove is uniquely situated to take advantage and access to multiple transportation options, so on and so forth. But due to the limited availability of infrastructure within the portion of the village, industrial development has been very limited over the past 20 years, limited. TIF can be used to make the area more attractive for redevelopment by eliminating conditions which inhibit private investment. The village officials have determined that without direct municipal involvement and financial assistance, planning objectives for this area cannot be met. To encourage new investment in the industrial district area, the village has proposed tax increment financing as a financial tool to help this along. It also says that TIF 1 was actually approved on January of 2012. As far as I see, that's 8 years ago, and it hasn't really worked. There hasn't been any true benefits of any industrial interest or any interest. The next TIF district was appropriated in 2015, TIF 2, and the resources from that retirement center, which seems to be one of the main sources of funds from that, was already approved and under construction when the TIF 2 was enacted. So basically what happened is TIF 2 went in and grabbed those revenues and said they're now part of the TIF area, which is kind of contradictory by saying that no investment or development would happen but for TIF. It did. And obviously our fire chief here had an incredible testimony of the real life impact of the TIF, where I think over a 5-year period they averaged about $8.75 a year from tax from that area to cover their cost and their calls to that to the retirement center, living center, which also has an opportunity cost to the rest of the community in that if they're tied up with calls over there and they don't have the money to expand their staff and or their needs because of revenue shortages, because of the TIF, someone else on the other side of town might be laying out on the driveway and they can't get the help they need. Not specifically something that has happened, but it very well could happen. So those are some of the things that I think also have to be thought about when you're making some of these decisions. Regarding the change in the boundaries of the TIF 2, it looks like the north, I guess I'll call it the northeast tip that is extended to Route 47 up there, is contingent or would be contingent to Wabansie College property, which also is a short distance from what the Crown property is or was proposing of the property that they own. Just an aside along those lines, I note that in the minutes from Wabansie College meetings on September 11th, that Dan Olson and a group from Crown Development met with them. I'd be interested to find out what that was about. I don't know that was publicly disclosed, but I can see the potential of somehow creating a land bridge for contiguousy to the Crown or to the existing TIF, which in this proposal allows for an easier transition to expand a TIF district. So it could be a way of circumventing the actual process that's due to go through the city, through the public. I'm saying could be, not saying is, okay? It says here that the success of this redevelopment effort will depend on cooperation between the public and private investment, and that the project area will become a stable environment to provide development by the private sector. The village will serve as the central force for directing the assets and energies of the private sector to ensure the unified and cooperative public-private redevelopment effort. It says here that, I don't want to read things that I don't need to. The redevelopment plan sets forth the overall redevelopment program to be undertaken and cause to undertake in public improvements and activities, enter into redevelopment agreements and intergovernmental agreements with private entities. So basically it gives the city the authority to do these things in the TIF district. Future land use, a variety of commercial and industrial uses are anticipated. Once again, we're back into the industrial focus.
Sir, a comment or a question?
Comment.
Okay, we're waiting for it. I mean, you're
This is
reading.
the comment.
Okay.
This is the comment. It's facts. It's facts from this. That is the comment of what is going on in this area. Basically, also the important thing is, and I mean, I know you were pretty generous with time last meeting, and you have been in the past, so I appreciate that consideration. Bottom line, which I will get to, is it basically gives the city and the village the opportunity to create and fund any improvements that it sees fit to make the assumption that it's going to attract outside business. Public improvements, the village already made significant investment to the redevelopment of this area through the extension of Galena Boulevard, extension of Municipal Drive, Route 30 in Galena. I believe that was TIF 1. I don't know where the money came from to pay for it. There wasn't any generating source in that area at the time other than land taxes that don't really accrue from farming. But it says here that given the undeveloped nature of the project area, that appropriate public improvements may include extension of Municipal Drive from Galena to Wheeler Road, $5,642,000. Business Park public improvements, streets, utilities, earthwork, $5,487,000. Extension of Cardinal Drive. Basically, it shows that you have the right to fund these through the city. The estimated projects cost that's in this TIF report that we just received, and I don't think it was highlighted in the presentation, that's why I'm bringing it out. And it's pretty important detailed information in my opinion. It's got a administration study, surveys, legal marketing, etc., $4,590,000. Property assembly, including acquisition, site preparation, demolition, environmental remediation, $4.5 million. Rehabilitation, construction, repair, or remodeling, $1,836,000. Public works or improvement and capital cost of taxing districts, $34,425,000. Job training and retraining, $413,000. Relocation cost, $45,000. Grand total of $45,900,000. That's the estimate for the TIF development cost. Sources of funds, and I'm almost finished. Sources of funds necessary to pay redevelopment project costs and secure municipal obligations. Such costs are to be derived primarily from incremental property taxes, which is the TIF. Other sources of funds which may be used to pay for redevelopment project costs or secure municipal obligations are disposition proceeds, federal, state, county, or local grants, investment income, private financing, and other legally permissible funds the village may deem appropriate. The village may use net incremental property taxes received for the redevelopment or other and in other contiguous redevelopment project areas or other project areas separated only by a public right-of-way, that this can be commingled, if you will. All right. Also, the village may issue obligations secured by incremental property taxes. It basically, the question is, it gives the village a lot of options to be creative in financing, but it really doesn't explain a plan on where those funds and sources are really going to come from and how. In other words, from what I understand, there's grants from the state and other counties and so on that are such road use taxes and so on and so forth. Is there a specific delineation as to what they're supposed to be used for? Or does it just come in under road use taxes? Are those supposed to be used to fix the roads,
No, it
existing roads?
comes up in under the incremental tax. So there's a baseline for the real estate taxes. Once the improvements are made, there's the tax increment financing. So
Right.
the new property value between the old and the new is used to pay back those
I
funds.
understand that, but for these improvements, it's implied here that these improvements are estimated of what it will take to make the area reasonable to attract someone.
And I
So
think
where
we
does
saw it-
where
said
does
it
the
last
45 million come from?
We said it last week and we've said it in prior meetings. We asked the developers to make the improvements. They are paid back through the TIF, through the increment in new taxes. So they go out, they finance all the development costs, and then they talk to the bank and say, this is our revenue to pay back the loans, is through the TIF money that comes in. So the village doesn't expend any money up front. At least that's been the consensus of this board. Future boards could change. But right now, we would have the developers expend all the money to make the development.
Okay, so again, this is helping clear things up for me. For the tip one, for the roads that were put in over by the airport and all that, where did that funding come from? I mean, there was nothing generating revenue in that area.
I'm not sure what roads you're talking about.
Extension of Route 30 or Galena Boulevard?
Yeah, we talked about it last week. We received a $6 million or $5 million grant from the feds, and then the village financed the balance of the money. And we're making $450,000 a year payments to pay back those bonds, and we're using the non-home rule sales tax for 20 years to pay back those bonds.
Okay, and I guess that's part of my other question is that while you're doing that, those same funds could have been possibly used to refix the existing streets that need to be fixed within the community. I mean, is there?
It was the decision of the board back then that the roads need to be extended to generate new development. And with the grant that we were able to get from the federal government and the bonding authority that we had, we felt it was good, the right use. We probably would not have seen any development on the west side of 47 if Galena had not been extended. You wouldn't have the Walgreens, the Culvers, the funeral home, all that without the extension of Galena.
But I guess the other part is then that federal grant of $6 million, was that specifically for that project?
It specifically was.
Okay, and the other road use taxes and the money that comes in as grants that funds the sources to fix the streets within the community, where does that revenue come from?
That comes from our motor fuel tax. So we specifically are using the non-home rule sales tax to fund the bonds for the bonds that were used to extend Galena Municipal.
So I guess what I'm asking is, then there's no redirection of source of funds that could have been or could be used to fix existing roads and needs of the community for a TIF project or anything like that?
TIF money has to be spent within the TIF district. But the funds that we're using, the non-home rule sales tax money, that could be used for general funds. But at the time, we were talking to, who was it, Forest City, about putting in a multi-million-dollar commercial development that the residents throughout the village wanted. And it was the time, it was right to extend the roads, and we did at that time. Then the economy changed, and now we still have the source of funds to pay that those bonds back, so it's not, in a sense, taking money away from MFT funds.
All right, that's basically it. It just seems like there's a lot of latitude there that is unknown until it happens, I guess. But that's what I got from reading all of this. And anybody can pull it up. It's on your website. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Chief?
Good evening. I'm sure most of you know me. My name is Bill Perkins. I'm the chief for the Sugargrove Fire Protection District. On behalf of the district and the Board of Trustees, they just want me to come and make a statement of some considerations for the board before the agenda item comes up for the vote on the TIF district. So, following a question at the public hearing from the president of the adjacent homeowners association, the representative from Moran Economic Development discussed what parcels were included in the amended TIF and which weren't. The HOA was kind of questioning why certain ones were in, why a few were left out. And the gentleman from Moran said that at this point, to go back and add those two parcels starts the clock all over again, starts the cost all over again, and the district recognizes the issues that can, create. However, it was also said to remove parcels from the amended TIF area is not something that starts the clock back over again. Also, several times throughout that meeting, both from Moran and from village staff, over and over again, it was stated that the main purpose of this amendment to the TIF district right now is to make the two TIFs contiguous, so that funds can transfer between the two TIFs, not having to cause this inter-fund loan thing that you had to do before, or those type of things, and to make things flow much simpler. So it's kind of the belief of the district that that's what this amendment needs to go back to. Only include the parcels that truly make the two TIFs contiguous if you feel that that's what is going to make the TIF survive. It is our belief that the corporate park right next here that the village happens to own, to include that into the TIF district does not make the two TIFs contiguous. The purpose for adding that parcel was because one of the buildings, if I understand, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, one of the buildings is only half constructed, gravel floors on half of it, and TIF funds could be utilized so that the construction could be completed, and then you could find a tenant that could come in and lease the property. Lease the property, rent the property, so that the village could make revenue, while the fire district still has to protect that property with receiving absolutely no increase in real estate taxes. So we feel that I drive past that building, or those buildings, 6 times a day, and not once in all those times that I drove past that did the word blighted ever come into my mind. It's a beautiful corporate park. The buildings are kept up well. I don't see how it could even meet any form of the ability to be considered to be blighted. We also feel that the addition to I don't know if it's 3 or 4 parcels to the north, once again, do not do anything to make the two TIFs contiguous. As a matter of fact, one of those parcels, which is also owned by the village, is an approved lot with sewer, water, and utility access in an already well-established, well-developed, and well-populated industrial park. Once again, I fail to see how that property can be considered as blighted. So I don't really think that fits the need to make the two TIFs contiguous in order to be able to use the transfer of funds in between the two. We really feel that property should not even be considered and should properly be removed from the amendment that's before the board. As I stated at the public hearing and the gentleman referred to before, the property at 119 West Galena was mid-construction when the TIF was created. The construction site could not be considered to be blighted, and obviously it fails the but-for test. It wasn't but for the TIF, it was already under construction before the TIF even started. It is the belief of the district that during this amendment process that the property at 119 West Galena should be removed from the TIF, and that the taxes that are derived from that real estate property should be diverted back to the appropriate taxing bodies. And finally, the district continues to question and research the authority and the legality of the use of the TIF funds to purchase the property located on Hartman Drive. The representative for Moran Economic Development at the meeting clearly stated that TIF funds must be used within the TIF district. And I believe the village president tonight reiterated that exact same fact. However, that property as it sits today is not even contiguous to the TIF district. So it is property that is outside of the TIF. Whether the question was this amendment will then bring it in, that seems kind of putting the cart before the horse and not what the true intention of dispersion of TIF funds should be. The district feels that the funding for that was used, the TIF funds were used for to purchase that, really should be reimbursed back to the TIF by the village because it wasn't proper use of TIF funding. I think that the purchase of that property is what has put TIF 2 into the red, which has required the interfund transfer of funds from TIF 1 to TIF 2, which has now created the need to come back to this board to do an amendment so that the two TIFs are contiguous and the money can be transferred through. So it seems like one problem is continuing to create another. Today, a boy by the name of Lucas, he's an 11-year-old boy in search of a Boy Scout merit badge, came to the fire station, and he wanted to interview and question me about TIF districts and what effect it has on fire departments. And I tell you what, it was refreshing to see that an 11-year-old boy wanted to show the interest on what type of things were going to affect the fire department. And I can tell you that Lucas and Lucas's family is counting on you, the village board, their elected voice, to do today what is going to be right and what is going to affect them for decades to come. So with that, the board, the trustees, myself, respectfully request that the village postpone the vote on the amendment to the TIF district so that these considered items can be looked at, can be made part of the amendment, and then the proper adjustments could be made, and then it could be taken back before the board for a vote. I'm not aware of any circumstance that makes the rush to judgment for this necessary. And I think that if you keep the ability for us to provide public safety over the next 23 years of life of TIF districts and the forethought in your decision-making process, that you will make the right one. I want to thank you for your time, and if you ever have any questions, feel free to ask. So,
Thank you. Any other comments regarding any of the report? Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm not going to speak nearly as eloquently as Chief Perkins did, but I'm Sharon Likius. I'm the Library Director of the Sugar Road Public Library District. At this time, I just want to voice that we're here to neither speak positively or negatively about the TIF in place. At this moment, we like to remain neutral. What we would like to ask is possibly more time for our board to consider the information. It's actually very difficult during holiday months to have our boards have time to digest this information, and it's a very big decision. But I know at the previous TIFs, democracy has already spoken, and that we honor. We're here to serve our community. But we do feel like it's significant information. So if you can postpone, we would be in support of that. Again, our stance at this moment is neutral because we haven't had time to have more discussions about it. What I would like to convey is whatever decision you make tonight, please keep us in dialogue, because I know that some of these decisions are made because you're trying to find gas to put in that engine to drive your community forward. I need the same gas in the library, and we're all part of the same community. So whatever decisions you make, I would like to support future partnerships, because though there's not as much of an operational impact, admittedly, particularly if it's business growth, there is an impact on the ability to capture revenue, which the library so very much needs because we are underfunded within our community. So in the future, whatever decision you make, please keep us in the dialogue for possible discussions about, is there any compensation we could receive? If there's residential growth, can we capture the revenue that we might be entitled to for library cards? Or possibly future partnerships in which we might consider sharing some resources in the village, be it snow plowing or landscaping. I'm open to discussions about anything as we find ways to balance those books. So as you look to seek to move your community forward, please consider it a part of this. And we do want to support the other organizations that are here in our community, including the village and the fire department and our residents. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask me more information about the revenue and status and budget of the library. I'll be happy to discuss that with you. Or if individual trustees would like to come and have a dialogue and learn more about what's happening in our organization, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. So again, we're kind of doing an absentee stance on the matter right now, but we do think time to kind of look at those facts and figures is very important. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
I'm going to switch gears. For those of you on the board that don't know me, I'm Michelle Scales. I'm with that 526 Brookhaven. I am the 10th house from the west entrance and the 5th house from the park. 16 years ago, we built our home. The village required that our home have two sump pumps, pits, with two sump pump hits comes the sump pumps that run 24/7. A minute and 40, it turns off, the next one kicks on for a minute and 30. Next one kicks off. We do this all day long. Everyone sleeps with the fan on, we sleep with the sump pumps on. It's like our white noise. I haven't been to the meetings in the past few years because, quite frankly, I've been through this song and the dance. As the neighborhood is changing, the families are moving out, new families are coming in, we're still having the same fight 15 years later. This needs to be fixed. My electric bill, I'm going to tell you what the average electric bill from October, November, December, that means no air conditioning in a home that has energy efficient appliances and nobody's home during the day. My electric bill on average is $319. Imagine what it is when the air conditioner is on. This needs to be addressed. Not little pockets here and there, fix here and there. It needs to be addressed. And I'm asking all of you who are on the board, new to the board, who haven't done this song and dance 6 years ago, I voted for you because I need change. I need this to be put on the top. There's homes that can't get refinanced because they're infested with mold, that if the health department came in, they would shut them down. My electric bill is more than my taxes that I pay each month to live here. That's terrible for 16 years. So I'm asking you to take that into consideration. It's not just water. It's not just a broken pipe. These are our lives. These are our investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public? Just.
My name is Steve Holland. I'm the president of the Brightline Homeowners Association. We spoke last time we were here about TIF 2, and we had spoken about the fact that we had a discrepancy in the lands that were chosen for that TIF, and the fact that there were some parcels that were potentially missed within the TIF, and we also called into question why certain parcels were brought into the TIF overall. It's the association's opinion at this point that we don't agree with the TIF. We don't believe that the expansion of the TIF is going to benefit our community in any way. We don't believe that the Village of Sugar Grove has taken the steps necessary as it relates to the TIF as it stands right now in order to appropriately market the TIF, or to take the necessary steps to appropriately develop the TIF. Arguments were brought up earlier today that showed that the creation of the TIF overall failed but for argument originally, and that the necessary developments within those areas aren't occurring from private development. So with the way that the funds are adjusted and allocated, we're taking funds from our general fund, essentially, via the fact of designating the TIF and readjusting the TIF, and we're bringing them into a private lot that can be used for private development as opposed to the actual development by the public for the public good. I urge you today to either put through a continuance so that this can be discussed more heavily and in further detail, or to vote against the expansion of the TIF overall.
Other public to address the board? You don't have to, you can stand there if you'd like.
TIFs are neither good nor bad, in my view. They're an economic tool that's useful. A lot of surrounding communities have used them over the years, very successful. Aurora comes to mind. They've had TIFs for 30, 40 years. The Chicago Premium Outlet Mall is a beneficiary of a TIF. Lately, they've redone their TIFs, the Crosby Building, the Hobbs Building on River, the old West Aurora office building on River. A couple of the downtown buildings on Broadway, they separated into small TIFs to generate a better economic growth. TIFs only exist to generate private investment. Without TIFs, people aren't going to invest. They pick and choose where they're going to go. TIFs generally are beneficial. Yes, they are costly to some taxing bodies. But I would like to remind you, you are elected to represent the village of Sugar Grove, not the library, not the fire department. They are separate taxing bodies. And as such, they have means to generate their own revenue, as referendums and things like that. Now, we have, let me say that in the past couple of years, I've had to use the fire department, and they've been there within minutes. We have an excellent fire department, but we have to be economically conscious of what the actual needs are. If people are in need from time to time, I believe they have an obligation to open their books to the village and see what their actual needs are when they're asking for help. And that would include the library and the fire department. So I think you have to be careful. Your primary job is to grow the village. I haven't seen that much happen in the last few years. Everybody around us is growing. Oswego, other towns are growing. We need to get on the ball. We need to pay attention to what is good for the village and let the other taxing bodies worry about themselves. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right, I will close that portion. May I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay. Any requests for remove an item?
I do.
Okay.
D, C, F, G, and H, please.
D what?
D, C, F, G,
D,
and
D,
H.
E?
D, E,
The treasurer's
the
report or
four-
the tech?
D, not C. C is the treasurer's report. D, the TIF, the 4 TIF items,
Yeah.
and then the minutes. The comment about amending the village code regarding the minutes.
H.
Oh, okay.
H, I'm sorry, we said G and H. D, C, F, G,
D, E.
D, E, F.
I'm sorry. I see, I apologize, my pen marked through it, so it looks like C on my thing.
So D, E, F.
Yeah, so
G.
4 TIFs and village minutes.
Trustee Cook, would you amend your first?
I'll amend my first.
And Trustee Heron, your second?
I'll amend my second.
So it's a consent agenda for items A, B, and C.
And
I. And I. Okay. Roll call, please.
Trustee Cook,
Aye.
trustee Heron,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Aye.
trustee Walter,
Aye.
trustee Cronin,
Aye.
trustee Montalto.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion to approve ordinance amending the Sugar Grove Industrial Redevelopment Project Area Number 1, removing certain parcels from said project area. I got a motion to approve, and then we can discuss.
I'll make the motion.
Discussion?
I agree with the chief on this. Looking at the impact in the future, right now, there's not a great burden on some of those areas, but you build up on it, and now we have, the fire department is going to need to respond to those that they haven't with farmland. And if they're not getting that money, then we are just spreading the fire department way too thin, that I think it would be unsafe for our citizens, to have it that way.
If you don't have the TIF, you won't have any development, so it'd stay ag.
Not necessarily. I mean, the economies can change, but if we do have the TIF, you can guarantee that the fire department is not going to get any of that money.
Chief, can I ask you a question, please? If I've got a business and it's in one of these areas, and I have an employee that gets hurt, and you have to come out and pick up that employee, how is that paid for? Would that be under workman's comp, where the
So we do
business
have,
would
we
have
do
to
have
pay?
ambulance billing, and we would bill the patient's insurance company. Now, depending on where the patient resides, depends on what happens with the total payment of the bill. We estimate that a typical transport, and this was from some research we had to do and reports we had to file, an average transport costs about $2,500. Insurance companies aren't going to pay $2,500 for an ambulance call. So we'll pay in the area of maybe $1,500. So if we bill $1,500, whether or not we get that entire amount is hard to say. People that are on Medicare only pays about 23% of what the total bill is. If you're on Medicaid, it only pays about 8% of the total bill. And if you're a Sugar Grove resident and you don't have insurance, or you can't afford, or it's not all covered, or you can't afford the bill, the fire district writes it off because you're a resident of the Sugar Grove Fire Protection District. So that is how it is. We don't bill the business owner. The whole insurance company thing will work through to getting workers' comp if it's actually a workers' comp type call. So we don't get involved in that definite. We just send the bill to the insurance carrier.
So it kind of depend a lot on the business that was there. Like if it was another home, there's the Medicaid and Medicare that wouldn't typically pay out as much. But if it was nuts and bolts factory that somebody broke, slipped and fell, or something like that, that typically would.
Depends on what level of insurance they have. If they're a part-time employee, are they even getting insurance? And what like I said, what benefits are they willing to pay? So here's it's a huge guessing game as far as what funding we actually get for that. I know that to really bring it down to it, 91% of our revenue is real estate taxes. Only 6% is ambulance bill. So you can see that ambulance billing does not cover the ability to put firefighters on those rigs to respond to those calls. It's the real estate tax dollars that do.
Okay.
As long as you're up, Chief,
Sure.
two quick ones, and I'm not trying to, I have all the respect for the fire department.
Not a problem.
I've got 39 years involved working for a police department myself, so I get emergency services. But two things that haven't been covered here that I think need to be out there. And we went through this with the first TIF with prior chief that was touting it's going to put people in danger, and we're going to need more services with the industrial parks. And I asked at the time how many calls in the industrial parks do you get a month on average? They had 12 a year, so like once a month. How many calls do you respond to per month at the senior place we're talking about?
We respond there 60 times annually.
60 times annually, so you're talking about 4 5 times a month, about once a week. Now the other thing that comes into play is if I have to do something on this side of town, it puts the other side of town in danger. We have mutual aid, contracts with other agencies like Aurora and Yorkville and others. So if you are tied up on an ambulance, one of the other ones will respond to assist, and you do the same for them, correct?
That is absolutely
I
correct.
just want that out. Okay, so it's not, we're not screaming, the people are in danger, because that's not necessarily the case.
The case is that you put the nuts and bolts factory over there with 400 employees that increases our call volume.
Well, I get that.
To where I never have
an
any
effect. I'm just saying, if you're responding
now I'm
twice a week,
requiring Yorkville or Elburn to protect the residents of Sugar Grove, and that's not their responsibility. That's ours, and that's the combination of the village board and the fire district
You know, and in regards to the fact that you have to do what's right for Sugar Grove, right, what's
I
right for
totally
the
get that.
Sugar Grove residents who happen to be residents of the Sugar Grove Fire
And I worked for an agency that actually had a satellite facility at a senior complex like that because they had so many calls, and it was such a big complex. But we're not talking a dozen calls a day there, we're talking maybe 2 calls a week. So,
all those continue to add up. As I said before, it's not what's the fact that there's nothing in the TIF district now. It's when there is something that it's gonna, basically, the only other thing I can do is go back and have the other people paying taxes subsidize that because I'm getting no money for that. I just don't think that's fair.
How about fire?
Well, the cost of our equipment, you buy a new engine, you're looking at $650,000 plus.
Oh, I know.
Couple $100,000 for an ambulance. These things wear out. They're costly to repair and replace.
And I'm not arguing that. I totally get that.
People of Sugar Grove are taxed enough. For us to go out and do more referendums and ask them to give more of their hard-earned dollars to cover this stuff is ridiculous. When stuff like this is being taken away from us.
Okay.
For 23 years, at some point in time, can't you add another 12 years to it? To redo it. So if they could add up to 35 years of nobody receiving tax money.
And the second there's a fire, everybody will be on your side.
Trustee Lindy, is there any other comments?
I would like to ask the board if you would like to follow what the library asked, is if we could table this until the next, extended, so they had time to give their input on it.
Well, this had, no, not the library district, but there was a TIF meeting back in early December, and it's been on the agenda for some time, so it's, don't know why it's just being recognized.
Statement in Shannon's behalf. That meeting in December was the annual joint review board meeting. My total intention was, when I came to it, was that we have that every year. You tell us what money's been expended and what the balances are. And then there was a third one requesting joint review board approval of the amendments in the TIF district that I never knew about was coming. And I don't think that Shannon did either. So in her defense, I don't think you had that one early December, but it really wasn't probably until we had some conversation about the public hearing.
Well, that's why we also made our statement too. We didn't speak pro or negative, because that's a very valid point, Sean, and we do respect that.
Yeah.
Just holiday month meetings are very hard for us and for our boards too. So, but we would also next month, should you table it, like to invite you out to speak to our board to convey more information. But we understand we couldn't attend. We respect that.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon.
I'd like to say something.
First of all, this isn't a new tip, and I know that this board, if there are any other future tips coming our way, we're going to do our due diligence. I'm going to do my due diligence. I know there's a mechanism for them at times, but I have a viewpoint on it. But this is on an existing TIF district, not the removal of the TIF districts. I know there's an expansion, but I'm hearing Chief Perkins and others speaking, and I personally would like to listen further and not ready to jump on a vote on this. Definitely through consent as I hold it off for now. But I'd like to warrant additional time. I don't know why there's a rush here. So I'm not ready after hearing the event.
If I can, just a couple facts. This item was first discussed by the board at a public meeting as far back as April 2018. And it's been discussed at several meetings over almost 2 years. So to say it's rushed, in my opinion, is incorrect. Like I say, almost 2 years of discussion about this specific item. This is not a last minute rush it through. The fire district talked last meeting about all the revenue they're losing from the senior apartment building. The most recent data, they missed out on $3,334 annually. The fire district, according to their state filing for fiscal year 2019, collected over $3,300,000 in property tax revenue. It's less than 1/10 of 1% of their revenues. They talk about $2,500 average cost for an ambulance transport. I've asked them in the past what the incremental cost is. They've never answered that question. Some of those costs, I believe, are costs that are incurred whether the ambulance leaves the building or not. So it isn't necessarily every one cost of that incremental. and $3,300 are missing out, regardless of the cost, isn't making a difference on their current activity.
But the thing is, it's $3,300 a year.
Fire chief mentioned appropriately that the main purpose was contiguity. He is correct. That was the main purpose. It wasn't the only purpose. It's never been discussed as the only purpose. The other purposes that he mentioned tonight have been discussed all along. That again is nothing new. When they say I'm not an attorney, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I'm going to do that anyway. In the past, say, 5 years, how many calls have you had to a 160 building?
The one,
160 building.
I could answer that question without pulling a report.
My belief is probably 0, and if there have been calls, I would guarantee you it's single digit. So to say that the building out of the rest of that building is going to have a major impact, because they're going to have to provide service for it, I think is a stretch at best. We talked about industrial. As Rick said, a few years ago when we asked this, it was 12 calls per year for the entire stretch of Parkland Drive. That's a lot of square footage of building. And granted, another industrial building next to on this part we're talking about adding could add calls. Is it going to add dozens and dozens of calls based on evidence today? No, it's not. They talk about that it didn't meet the but-for clause. The Joint Review Board for both TIF 1 and TIF 2, which is comprised of the taxing bodies that are impacted, the majority voted that it met the but-for clause. In fact, for TIF 1, the fire district stated at that public meeting that TIF 1 meets all the eligibility to be a TIF, but they were going to vote no anyway. So they admitted that it met the quality. So to come in here tonight and say it didn't meet the but-for clause is absolutely incorrect. And to say that for anyone to say that the TIFs are a failure, it's premature. Have they resulted in development so far? No, they haven't. The Albert Mall is a perfect example. That TIF took almost 20 years before a single thing happened in that TIF district. And that TIF district is one of the most successful ones, not only in the state, probably the country, in the millions and millions of dollars that brings the city of Aurora. So again, to call these failures is also completely unfair. It was mentioned that the village needs to think about the right thing to do today and the impacts it will have decades forward. I totally agree. My opinion is the right thing to do today is to approve this TIF discussion that's been happening for almost 2 years and work toward that economic engine that's going to solve the financial problems. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but certainly hopefully for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. Because if you don't do something like this, then in the case they keep bringing up, it's costing them $3,300 a year. Good luck trying to get the investment in these areas. We've been trying to do it with the TIF, and we're struggling. We all admit that. But again, it's premature to call it a failure, and I don't think approving a TIF today, is doing the right decision for decades to come.
If I may add, I think adding a couple of parcels up north is listening to the public outcry when that Heartland was looking at filling in that vacant space by Canelan High School. There was outcrying by residents that they did not want a lot of trucks going by the middle school. So by us acquiring this property, it'll help remove the trucks from the school district area. So we're trying to have some foresight and buy this property. And we'll probably never see the 37 acres develop if it's not included in the TIF. And that was one of the reasons to expand the TIF to the north, is because last time we did have somebody interested in that parcel, they could not develop it without assistance, and they cannot participate in the TIF benefits without being annexed into the TIF district. So there's a lot of discussion going on. We have not nearly seen the repayment for the $9 million, if you will, that extended Galena and Municipal Drive, yet it helps reduce the time to respond to calls that the fire district has or the ambulance district has. And we didn't ask the fire district or anybody else to help finance that road, but yet it's a public benefit. So, the village makes a lot of public benefits. We don't get paid back for it. We know it's needed to help out the community at large, and that's part of the TIF. without these TIFs, we're not gonna see any development, so you might as well consider no growth going on within the village, because every community around us is extending TIF benefits to attract commercial development. And commercial developers expect that nowadays. So if we don't have a TIF, we're not gonna see any commercial development. And then after it's only, 15 years left, then you won't see any increment in taxes. It's gonna stay zero. So, it's pay me now or pay me later. And I think the village is trying to look out for the best interests of all the taxing bodies. All right, any comments? Rick? Sean? Ted?
No,
Okay, we have a first and a second. If you'd like, you could amend your motion to table it. If that fails, then we could go back to a motion to approve it. So, Trustee Cook, would you amend your first to table this ordinance?
Well, I would have moved forward,
Okay, all right.
so I would amend it to.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call to approve this ordinance.
Trustee Cook,
Aye.
trustee Montalto,
Aye.
trustee Heron,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Nay.
trustee Cronin,
Aye.
trustee Walter.
I'd like to abstain from the writing.
And I would vote yes if it was.
Motion carries.
Motion to ordinance C, item C, ordinance adopting and approving an amended Sugar Grove Northeast Airport District Increment Financing number 2 redevelopment plan and related development. Okay.
Is that?
E, yeah.
Same thing.
I'm sorry, E, yeah, E, thank you.
Wrong font.
Yeah. No, my fault. Can I get a motion for that, adopting and approving?
Motion.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion?
Are these all under the same
Yeah.
discussion?
All right. Hearing no discussion, roll call, please.
Trustee Montalto,
Aye.
trustee Heron,
Aye.
trustee Cook,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Nay.
trustee Walter,
Abstain.
trustee Cronin,
Aye.
motion carries.
Ordinance adding additional parcels of property to the Sugar Grove Northeast Airport Tax Increment Financing District number 2 redevelopment project area. Can you get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Trustee Cook,
Aye.
trustee Cronin,
Aye.
trustee Walter,
Abstain.
trustee Montalto,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Nay.
trustee Heron,
Aye.
motion carries.
Ordinance adopting a tax increment financing for the amended redevelopment project area.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Trustee Cook,
Aye.
trustee Heron,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Nay.
trustee Walter,
Abstain.
trustee Montalto,
Aye.
trustee Cronin,
Aye.
motion carries.
And then motion amending the village code regarding minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
The only thing I had on that is, what I had asked last time, if we could also mention in there, I have it on my phone, so that's why I'm looking at that. Surfing.
We did add the recording.
It says, minutes and recording, but it doesn't say anything about audio.
Is it recording?
I'm assuming that's,
Video recording, too.
yeah, I was just wondering, because it shall keep written record, the heading says minutes and recordings, but reading the text, I didn't see where it mentioned audio at all in there. It's an electronic record, which can be audio or it can just be a PDF or something, and I just wanted to see if there's, if I I'm misreading it or something, but I saw that the title is called minutes and recordings, but I did not see anything, because recorded,
Because it's on, YouTube, so it's,
right, no, I just wanted something in there that said that we would be providing audio or something, because I don't mind having the abbreviated minutes that we have, as long as we have in this ordinance that there will also be audio available for the public.
I thought that was the reference to recording, so.
That's just in the minutes and recordings, and it talks about, maybe I'm misreading it, but it says written record and proceedings. See, the members of the village board recorded as either president, it didn't,
It was the last item, E.
the clerk shall keep an electronic record of the proceedings of the board, electronic record that make available to the public and maintained for a period of 18 months.
Yeah.
Electronic record isn't.
Electronic audio record.
Yeah, I would like to have to say audio in there because electronic record.
That, yeah, Scrivener's error.
Yeah, well, we have it listed subject to attorney review, so certainly part of the motion is to clarify.
That's all I wanted to say, clarify that there's audio,
recording.
not just a.
Could we tweak that to maybe include other things for future? Could it say audio, video, other, or just audio?
Just more general electronic.
A little general,
Well, I
in
think
case something were to change,
audio.
we're within
Right,
that.
I think the concern is that electronic is too broad and that someone may interpret to say, well,
My
it's,
electric typewriter.
well, no, but it's a, like say, a PDF file.
That's what I thought it was like a PDF, it's like, I want something more than a PDF, I wanted.
But we can, you can approve it with the direction to, for staff to work with the attorney to clarify that it says, that audio specifically is included. We can figure out what the right language is.
Yeah, I just didn't, when I read it, I saw the electronic and I thought, oh, that's a PDF.
Okay.
I can understand that concern because of that, I'm thinking electronic, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's the only nitpick that I have.
Okay,
I'll
trustee,
amend my own.
trustee Montalto.
I'll amend.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Trustee Heron,
Aye.
trustee Montalvo,
Aye.
trustee Clark,
Aye.
trustee Lindy,
Aye.
trustee Cronin, trustee Walton.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Moving on, Mallard Point drainage, Scott? Brad? Thank you. Thanks. Scott Trotter is Trotter and Associates. They've done a lot of the work in Mallard Point, done our consulting engineers on this issue. Yeah. Thanks. See you, Aaron. Yeah. How you doing?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Every time I see Tony, I say that. So, as you know, we're continuing to struggle with the groundwater issue at Mallard Point, and that if I want to go backwards just a little bit, because I know not everybody has been involved with this since 2008, but for those of you that have,
Michelle,
I'm sorry, we're discussing
you
it
want
once
to
again.
move over so you can see things?
So, pre-development conditions, there was a series of tiles through this entire area, as everyone is aware, and that particular tile system was partially taken out during the development of this a long, long time ago. But as part of that, that tile system was responsible for moving groundwater through the area. Not stormwater, but naturally occurring groundwater through the area. When those tiles were interrupted and the houses were built, there is really not a convenient route for that groundwater to be removed from the area and it returns to its natural state, other than to say that we have a stormwater system that takes care of surface water as well as some groundwater, and the village, in the meantime, since development of this property and this groundwater issue, have invested a significant amount of money in providing auxiliary items for tiling and relief of this groundwater situation. So, since 2008, we've done numerous projects, including routing of a major tile all the way down to the creek, as well as other tile improvements that are taking care of some groundwater issues. We've lowered the overall elevation, overflow elevation of the pond in this area. However, that has not relieved entirely the groundwater issues. And as you saw some of those tiles that I was showing you, they are specifically were routed through this area right here. I believe several of the complaints that we're receiving have been from these 8 houses in this area that are continuing to have groundwater issues which affect their sump pumps. We have brought tiles and systems out and allowed several of the homes to connect their foundation drains or their sump pumps directly to the tile systems that you have constructed, which has helped many of the residents. But in the last project, you'll know that there were several trees and several tiles up here that were not maintained, that were on the farm field. As part of that overall project, the village extended and invested into rehabilitation of these tiles, removal of these trees, and maintenance of this area, not to take over ownership or control of them, but to reestablish them so that they would work and function and carry some of this water away.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Where that was done is not on village property? That you just spoke
That's
of?
the Oval Farm.
So it's on Oval property?
It's on Oval's property.
Permission,
He
easy.
gave us permission.
Right. So
But at the end of the day, the village paid for that?
at the end of the day, the village has, yes, expended money to get the original tile system to work.
Okay.
So to the best of our ability, it is aged, right? But is not responsible for maintaining those tiles up in that system, just so we know.
Could you put that back up for a
Yes,
second?
sir.
Quick question, because I've been involved in this since the beginning. I live on the high side of that subdivision, so we've never, knock on wood, never had any water problems. But where that problem is down there, I mean, Oval was losing the use of that as farmland too because it was deteriorating so much. Everything to the east of that flows down to that. Could we be looking at this wrong? I know we were thinking that they were straight tiles, maybe aiming the water towards, could it be just the stuff coming down toward there from all the homes and it ends up down there at the lowest spot? Is there something we could do farther up in the subdivision to
Reroute that
to
water.
reroute the water? I guess.
Yeah. I guess the consensus has been, and not just myself, but a lot of different professionals that are involved, that we're not going to cut off groundwater from coming through the subdivision. It just isn't practical. We can't intercept all of the groundwater that wants to move through this area. But what we can do is and the conversation I want to have about today is, one of the alternatives discussed was to replicate what was done on the other side of Brookhaven and allow for the foundation drains. I'm going to borrow it if you don't mind. So we have Mather Lane and Brookhaven. Essentially, we're talking about these 8 lots here are the most impacted. Okay, and some of the conversations before were essentially we looked at this alternative, which we're proposing and discussing, and looked at the cost of that alternative to provide piping direct for each one of those lots, okay? And this tile system that we just got done discussing is essentially here. That was a couple of years ago, upgraded and maintained, which takes away the water from this wetland, okay, and drains part of that, and also provides direct drainage for a couple lots. And then another lot actually reversed its sump pump so that it wasn't discharging on the ground just outside the house, and routed that water to the storm sewer system in front, which was thought to be part of the problem. If you're just recycling the water, pumping it out of the basement, to pump it on the ground, to let it go back down to the basement, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We have to get it away from the property. Based on the last conversation, just in short, we meaning ourselves and staff, kind of revisited the previous plan that we said, okay, there is an option to run a new pipe along the back of the lots, okay? And then to provide drains at those manholes, okay, that would allow water into this pipe, and also to provide stubs for those property owners to connect to. Now this pipe needs to be deep enough such that it's below the foundation of the basement of those houses. So it's not inexpensive to construct, particularly in very wet soil. But that is the solution that was discussed most recently. Now, with that explanation, do you want me to go farther, Brent, or is that
We can pause and see if there's any questions, I think, at this point.
I'm gonna really go crazy on this one, but the cost of doing it this time, I know it was a couple $1 million last time for the pipe across the field. What are we looking at to do this?
We are probably looking, 3 years ago, this estimate was over $300,000. I will tell you, I have an estimate from my team that's showing me that it's $500,000. Until I get it designed, I can't give you an exact number, but that gives you a pretty good range. And the $500,000 is conservative, but we're not talking, it's not an inexpensive solution.
We are just,
and we're not talking about connecting the houses. We're talking about only acquire and installing this pipe, acquiring the easements and right of way to do so, okay? And then the homeowners would still need to connect the foundation drains from those houses to the pipe.
the other, and I've been through this when I was younger in Addison, where they had a lot of flooding issues. And the ultimate response was, after throwing so much money trying to fix it, if we're down to 8 houses, all the other houses are fine, would we be more fiscally responsible to buy those 8 houses, knock them down, and not have houses there?
Sold.
I know, but this is a discussion that hasn't been had, and I think it needs to be.
Well, we did discuss it very briefly at the staff level, and it's certainly a potential alternative. I think one of the unknowns is that we don't know. I'm hopeful that the example that was presented tonight is the extreme, not the norm for all 8. So I think we would certainly, regardless of whatever path we choose to going forward, I would recommend that between staff and our engineering consultants, we reach out individually to all those homes and spend some time at each one. In the past, we've done things as far as getting access into their house, inspecting the sump pit to make sure that the floats are set at the optimum levels, and to measure how often they actually run. And like I say, I'm hopeful that that's the worst case scenario, not what they all are, but we really don't know. Right. And but the problem is that, or potential problem is, while $500,000 is a massive amount of money, we have more in our budget to do. If you're talking about the purchase of 8 homes, I haven't looked up the value of those homes, but I would venture to guess that the average is probably
$250 to $300.
Yeah, so you're very quickly in the $2 million range, and again, you're talking about $2 million. It's completely unfunded. So
I'm just saying it might be something down because we keep throwing money into this, and if the rest of the subdivision is high and dry now, those houses have 3 things going against them. They've got a pond across the street from them, the marshlands. They've got a pond behind them, and they're the lowest end of the subdivision where the rest of the subdivision drains down to them. And I don't know that we'll ever fix this problem. So, I mean, it's something we certainly need to consider for the future. As a possibility, we may end up having to do that. So.
May I say something?
Sure.
When you say, I hope this is like mine's unusual, when I was one of the last homes built of those 8. Our lot did not sell because it didn't pass the soil test. So they kept digging and water would fill. This is before we even looked at the lot. So our house is actually 8 feet higher than everybody else's. So I'm already 8 feet higher than everybody else. But I do have a question regarding, you say that the homeowners would need to tie in. Those 8 homes, because we're the last house built, our sump pumps are tied into the sewers in front. So my sump pump goes off, I go to my mailbox and listen to it go. But there are homes whose sump pumps dump into the fields in back. So how would we tie into that? People, like, would I have to tie into it even though I'm already on the village?
We're, just for clarification. Okay. So, and I'm sorry that I can only point this one direction. So, the existing infrastructure is located here. There's tiles that come up through the field, and then it extends all the way down to the creek. What's being proposed is to connect to this manhole here, bringing new pipe around to the back of the lots. What we're saying about, as far as the homeowners connecting, if what is being proposed is that the village would bring manholes to the back of the lots, but the homeowners would be required to come from their foundation all the way out to the manholes provided. The current proposal that's being discussed doesn't actually bring the pipe across private property up to the house to connect it. So the homeowners would have some responsibility for getting from your foundation drain to this pipe.
Scott, can you talk about the elevation of the current pipe they're connected to versus this? And
the current pipe they're connected to?
Well, if it's a normal storm system, my
Yes,
understanding
that is the sump pump pumping out to it at the roadway elevation, which is, that pipe is higher than the basement.
Under this proposal, the sump pumps wouldn't have to run in theory at least. It would be a gravity drain for the most part? Is that the idea?
These houses were built with foundation drains, right? And those foundation drains are served by the sump pump, which brings it in and then pumps it out into the yard. Okay?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And so, but the fact of the matter is that the pipe that's being proposed, and part of the expense is to put it deep enough that it is below the finished basement elevations of all of the houses, so that the sump pumps, so that the water would be able to get away to this pipe rather than needing to be pumped out of the basement.
Before it got to the sump pump.
Correct. Now that the sump pumps I would still recommend that they stay, and that, as we did with the other houses within the subdivision, that a check valve be installed by the homeowner, because under flood conditions this pipe can fill up, and we don't want it to have a direct connection to those basements, and that would be a requirement of them connecting. And some pumps would be required at that time if under a flood condition this pipe was submerged. Okay, but under normal conditions it would drain out.
What is the grade drop from the street, from the front property to where you would have the drain back there?
Well, a better point of comparison is that if you look at the top foundation elevations of the houses, is that okay?
And then you can subtract 8 feet roughly.
Right.
So the top of foundation for houses range from essentially 679 to 682, okay, over the entire area. So it's about 4 feet top to bottom on the change in houses elevations. Bottom of basements are roughly 670 to 672, okay, is the basement floor elevation. And the pipe out back is sitting at 665 at the low and 668 at the high. So generally 4 feet under the basement floor is where this pipe is out back. Is just a concept that's being presented.
So that's going to be a significant cost for those homeowners to dig a pipe that first they have to go all the way down to their foundation, all the way from the back of the house to the back of the property, down 4 feet below even the bottom of their foundation, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
What could that cost?
Just a complete wag, right? Because of that, a public meeting and everything. But no, I'm just saying that if we said it's 50 feet, I mean, yeah, somebody's gonna invest in the neighborhood of $5,000. I think is what people were investing before when that we did the private connection. We put the pipe at the street, if you remember, and they
Trustee
connected.
Gary did, paid $2,500, but he contracted with the excavators when they were there. So I would say 5,000, but it could
Right.
be more. But
How does that work, like our fence, we can't, the village requires you to, you put up your fence, you gotta put the post, requires it to be 4 feet down, it's floating in the water. Our fence doesn't even stay up because there's nothing.
Right.
You know?
So this proposal would require easements from all of those homeowners to be able to install this pipe across the back, as well as work with the Park District and other property owners in order to have a wide enough swath to get this done. It would require permits from the Army Corps, for us to also have permits and work with the county from soil and water conservation. So.
This isn't a really silly question, but this pipe that you speak of in the back being lower, well, where is that pipe tying in? Now, what elevation is the existing tie-in? Is it going uphill after that?
No. And it's part of the infrastructure that the village put in previous phases.
Okay.
So,
But it says low, whatever it's tying
Yes.
is obviously,
right, it's not.
it's lower.
The whole system
last
is
time we
gravity
had
based.
The whole system at that point would be gravity based. I mean, with the exception that under a flood condition, right, we need those check valves in place.
And this could take, with the Army Corps of Engineers, a year or two to complete this, because I remember the last time.
Permitting is not easy.
We had to wait like an entire year to see if some
Fiber muscle.
orchid or something grew in the field that would stop the project.
Yes, sir.
I guess, and so recently we approved the pipe fix out
Yep.
here,
Mhm.
and I was under the impression that that was going to relieve.
That's a different location altogether.
Yeah, but the issue is water was backing up, so I thought more water would flow and it wouldn't necessarily be flowing to their home.
Well, more water is flowing.
And so it's
So
working.
substantial. But it does not necessarily relieve, and as far as the groundwater monitoring wells, they're lower.
It's going down, but it's not.
They're not below their basement. So they still have water at those, in these that's tributary to these basins.
So I have a well in front of my home, and you come and check it, it's every week, or whatever they do.
We check them all every week, and then we have one primary one we check daily.
So the water level in front of my house is going down, but my sump pumps are just deep run.
Brad, you can talk about, to the degree you remember, is in that particular one, maybe how below the surface where the groundwater kind of is and where it's fluctuated over the course of the project.
Well, prior to the repairs, it was coming out the surface at the corner, the 5.4 Brookhaven. It was running out of the well onto the parkway. Now it's, what is it, 18 inches? It's roughly 18 inches down as of today. You know, it fluctuates with rainfall too. So.
And then, with the recent repair, and I know you guys have thrown these numbers out there before, if you could talk, Scott or Brady, the diameter, I guess, of the discharge, if you will, all the way at the end of the stream, how full it's flowing, and kind of what that means in gallons per minute or something. Because I think it's scary but impressive how much water continually flows out of there.
if you go down to Jericho and you go east on Jericho, and there's the bridge for the Rob Roy drainage ditch. If you go to the north side, you can see 3 large concrete pipes that come out. They have flared sections, and you can just see the water running, and that's all groundwater that's coming out.
I mean, it's
I want to go back
thousands or hundreds of gallons a minute.
to your first comment, so I understand. You said if someone ties into the sewer drain,
Storm.
system, sorry, that it's going to basically they're just recirculating.
No.
that
When
water.
when the houses were originally built, the sump pumps pumped basically up to the surface on the yard,
Yeah.
right? And that water didn't necessarily get away from the foundation of the building because the yard is saturated, right?
Right.
And so that water is almost recycling if you only put it up to the yard. So it was recommended that these houses extend their sump line to the storm drain which flowed to the pond, which flowed away. So you're right. So if we don't, part of the issue was they were pumping it out to the back of the yard, right? But it didn't really get away from the house.
That's not what this was.
Well, the storm system right now is in the front, correct?
Is in the front where the roads are.
Okay.
And but of these houses, but the issue is that system itself is significantly higher than the bottom of these basements, so it all has to be pumped to there. By doing the system that we're talking about, it will be below the basement, and if the pipe was installed from the house to there, it would normally flow by gravity, other than under severe situations like flood.
And is it, Brad or Tony, correct that to our knowledge there at least is one or two or three or some homes in that stretch that are not connected to the storm sewer? Is that accurate?
At least one that dumps into that field tile in the back.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's, what, 2 or 3 that just dump to the backyard right now still? At least 2 that dump to the backyard.
Yeah, so
And
one,
are they running?
well, it's hard to know where it's flowing, but one of the considerations, whether this project is done or not, or something different is, it's my understanding that the village has the legal authority to require those homeowners to connect either to the existing storm system or to a new pipe if it was installed. We've hesitated to do that today because that alone is a several $1,000 expense, especially the people who are releasing in the backyard with a finished basement, got to, someone get it to the front, but that is something that going forward the board may want to consider, under any of the scenarios, should they be mandated to connect to the storm sewer system, because under the theory being that it's contributing to the problem in somebody's yard.
And to put in a dewatering well, or it's expensive itself, and ongoing.
That and the soils we have out here aren't necessarily conducive to just dewatering an entire area. The water needs to move through this entire region. That's why there's multiple tiles. So to try and develop, yes, it could be developed, but running it indefinitely would have a high power cost, and I don't think it would be near as effective as trying to run this one.
Okay.
But,
other alternatives.
yeah.
And since we're throwing everything out there, is it accurate that drainage from the Route 47 underpass flows through there, and that there is some concerns if in the future it's widened, that would have an increased impact?
Yes.
Okay. Not that there's any answers, but it's very complicated.
There is a future potential impact from that exact conversation, yes.
I know that she doesn't know, but we were one of the first 6 homes built in there, and when we built, they were charging premiums for the houses, the lots down by the water.
Yes.
And I told my wife I want to be as far away from that as possible. And you could see at that time before the homes were built, that's the bottom of a soup hole. The land from all 4 sides goes down right there. So there's no way to run from it.
No, I know. And what goes back to what you had just said, if you go on a rainy day when it's like 4 now, there is substantial water that comes from the underpass through the ovals under the street.
Right.
It is a waterfall coming out that drain pipe that goes underneath the street, right next to the Leatherman house, the one on the south side of the street, right next to their driveway, and it just pours. And I know there's no, what goes up, it's got to come down somewhere. So I don't know how much of that water, I don't know if this takes into consideration the water that we're also getting under the viaduct. And now that 47 is going to expand, maybe some conversations with IDOT need to be had on how to reroute that water while we're doing all the construction.
I can say that village staff has brought this to my attention on numerous occasions and are well aware of IDOT's potential impact. As far as a resolution, I don't believe that's, at least I haven't been part of that conversation on what that resolution might be.
Yeah, no, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yep. No,
Eventually it's gotta
thank
be
you.
something to discuss.
Well, I think it'd be worth staff investing some time to do some further research on these 8 lots and see what data you can collect.
Right.
Joe, I'm sorry.
You have a homeowner here that has living with water in their is this village allowing a homeowner to live in a house with active mold growing in their house. That is a deadly health hazard. Someone has dropped the ball if you're allowing people to come to the village board and say they have active mold in their house and you don't care.
No, I don't think anybody said we don't care. Like, we've done stuff over the course of time. But what my next question off of yours would be, what could we have done differently? And what can we do in the future to prevent something like this?
She should not be living in a house with active mold. That's a health hazard. You should buy the house out.
You can't refinance.
You should buy the house.
You can't
from
sell.
her.
We already
If
have
nothing else.
regulation.
Or figure out how she can live in a house with active mold. She said it's growing up a foot in the basement walls.
My husband has put it out. So
That is not, you know that's not proper. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth investing some time to find out whose sump pump's wrong, how often, and then everything else.
And just a little bit, if I can, to address Sean's comment, is if I remember correctly, I know we get off track a little bit, but the initial project, I think, was well over $2 million, and that cost was shared between the village, homeowners through a 20-year special assessment. King County kicked in a portion, but one of the original concept designs, had multiple phases to it, but I think we were several $1 million more than that. And this is all unfunded work. There is the village doesn't collect a stormwater fee, any type of fee. These are just dollars we got to find somewhere. And so I think, if I remember correctly, we knew when we did the initial improvement that it was the hope that would solve all the problems, but that we knew it wasn't. There's no guarantee all of it is going to solve all of it, but the original design included more work, but it all comes with a very significant cost. And so I think we've done, from the very first project, I think there have been some phases, not to that scope, but also hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we didn't go back and add up every cost, but I think it's fair to say that there's I think minimally, if you include everything, over $3 million that's already been spent addressing this issue. So my point is being that a lot of dollars have been spent, both from the residents that live throughout the entire subdivision of Malibu and Rolling Oaks, and even more from the rest of the village paying to help try to solve this problem. I think to your point is, I don't know what the answer is as far as what could we have done. We could have theoretically spent a whole lot more money a couple of years ago that we didn't have,
like if a new subdivision.
Right. That's the second. But if a new one comes in, I don't. I guess somewhat the answer would be is depending upon where it is, to the extent that you want to explore, and
if they don't.
On the one hand, there's a fundamental right to develop your property. Is kind of I think the basic thing is you have a right to develop your property, and there can be issues with soils, and that it's kind of more of a policy issue in the sense of someone could easily come in here and make an argument and say, if the soils aren't whatever, absolutely don't allow anybody to build on it. And somebody else can come in here and say, absolutely they have the right to build on it. And some level, I certainly don't think anybody would say to that extreme, but some amount of sump pump running is normal. That's what happens in Illinois. Lots of people's sump pumps running. Whatever you're experiencing, so I don't want to make it sound like that's normal or acceptable.
Right.
But
Going back to what Rick had said, and Sean, what could the village have done different? Stuck to the guns and not let these homes be built.
Well,
Was that an initial?
That was one option, maybe not let them be built, but the other option might be that they don't have basements, maybe be on slabs, so they're on top, not.
So if we were to get soil samples where they had to fill, would you say 4 feet, 8 feet?
Yeah.
Could that be a red flag? I don't know.
Back in the
I
day.
teach 4th and 5th grade math and science,
Well,
this is out of my
This is
wheelhouse a little
the
bit.
late 80s, early 90s, and there's a whole different mentality. And,
Yeah, when we bought our house, we didn't look at any of this. We just thought, oh, beautiful home that backs up to nothing, great. The neighbors were upset with us because they heard it was supposed to be a park because nobody would build on it. We were like, well, it's fine. But that didn't last long.
I mean, it's a hard one, and again, to my knowledge, when former trustees Geary home was built, the foundation was dug and the hole filled up with water very quickly, and I believe the original builder put a pipe under the road to drain it by gravity to the pond, and I think that worked for some period of time. So there was some issue with the pipe, and essentially the solution that we did was kind of the same solution X years later. So I mean, it's easy now to say that, well, gee, a similar solution should have been done in the other units. I wasn't here, I don't know anybody was, we don't know exactly what happened to know, who was aware of what and who made what decisions. It's so hard to, to try to go back and figure out what happened 20 years ago or longer.
Right, it's done, it's over with, and unfortunately this board has inherited decisions that were made, but I don't think the homeowners should be punished for that. I can't afford to dump $30,000 into my $250,000 home.
all right.
Question back here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have two things. So do you feel like, is it your professional opinion that this was a failure of the original design or the materials involved?
I would be taking the conversation way too far. Okay? The way the subdivision was laid out is not an uncommon design. I would say that the way the tiles were taken out of service, some of this groundwater could have been anticipated. The severity of it, probably not. Okay? There is a lot of groundwater moving here that I wouldn't necessarily expect that was coming across this field. Because we see field tiles all the time with the development. So, looking back 30 years, okay, and what information was known at that particular time, that would be very professional of me to second guess what was happening.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. And then the other thing that maybe I'm not totally familiar with this whole thing. I have kept a little bit abreast of it. The original engineers do we know if the village went to the original engineers? Or they had to have been a licensed and mounted company, correct? I mean, the village is sustaining all of this, the taxpayers, the village, I mean, it's all the same thing, it's all the same entity. I mean, I would assume if there's a failure.
And just to separate two issues, right? The original engineers would have designed the utilities, the roadway, the stormwater system, all of that.
Right.
But what we're talking about here is groundwater. None of those things. They're not related. They're completely separate. So I run, okay? And I have sump pumps and I have ponds on my farm and I have groundwater that I deal with. And that's to be expected as part of my overall system. And that I have tiles and pipes that I must maintain because it is groundwater. It's not my neighbor's stormwater coming across my property. It's groundwater.
Right,
so
but if
I'm just saying,
property.
But I don't want to get too detailed. So,
well, I'm just curious. This is a municipality.
No, just as a municipality. Let's keep in mind that the village does not have a system in place village-wide or utility village-wide intended to maintain the level of groundwater.
And at that time, somebody came in and said, this is buildable land, go ahead and develop. And so it seems to me there was a failure a really, really long time ago, and I think we all obviously are here 16 years later with 8 homes that have severe mold problems. So it seems like there's a negligent issue for the last decade and a half. So we don't live on farms, we were farms at one point, but this is a municipality.
But what I'm trying to convey is that while the municipality is responsible and does maintain the stormwater system, the roadways, the water, the sewer, all of those utilities, it does not, in most of the subdivisions within the village of Sugar Grove or any other municipality of 60, which I serve, maintain a subsurface system to control groundwater. So I do not believe, in my professional opinion, that there was any mistake or any malfeasance by the previous engineer who designed this, nor the one who approved it as the village engineer, nor anybody who was necessarily involved. I don't think they could have anticipated the severity of what has happened. I don't think anybody did anything out of that they would have done different at the time. I just don't. So I just
She
want
was
to
just saying
get
something about the soil, that they weren't going to build on the property because there was so much water.
I'm not familiar with that particular conversation at the time. I can't speak to it.
Oh, I know, I was asking the village.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so give,
So no answers from the board on that have maybe been here a little longer. She's basically saying 16 years ago when she purchased the home, that it was an issue then with the soil.
none of us were here at that time when the homes were built.
So somebody approved that. I'm asking the people, I don't even know who did all of the work back then. Were these not licensed and bonded companies that approved the building of her home and these 8 homes? I mean, this is a municipality, this isn't a farm. She didn't buy 20 acres and hire her own soil testing, put in her own well and septic, where it would just be her problem.
Probably,
She probably relied on her builder to,
Correct.
yeah, and they're no longer in business. And
the background, and I'm probably the most knowledgeable because I do live in there, and I've lived in there for 26 years. The background of the original developer, Apex Development, went under 2 years into the build.
Okay.
So there were like 11 homes that sat half built for a couple of years. The land was owned by a bank. They took the land back from the original developer. We went under, and the 11 homes were owned by a different bank. The bank that owned the homes found someone else to come in and finish construction of the 11 homes in there that were half built for a couple of years. So they got sold. And eventually, another developer came in and built the rest of the subdivision. But
there
you have to understand.
there is a tiered system,
You have to
because
understand.
even the village approves everything that can be done.
And I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
You have to understand that the village today is not what the village was 30 years ago.
Oh, of course.
When we moved in here 26 years ago, the population was 1,400.
Right, but
And
she
it was
came in
mostly
today
farming
saying,
community.
this has been a problem for her for 16 years.
I get that, but if you
Yeah.
want the background, I'd be happy to completely tell you. The background, back then, it was a much smaller farming community. We had a part-time person working 20 hours a week that was our code enforcement person. I wasn't with the village then, I was just a resident, but I know from them coming in doing stuff. There were guys, Warren Hestigan.
No, I understand what you're saying,
Dug
but I'm saying
holes
you've
for
been on the
houses.
board since this has been a
And the
problem
board-
for her. So I'm just curious why she's here again.
That was
tonight.
already, the infrastructure was already in, all that kind of stuff before I owned the building.
I think, as Brent alluded to earlier, we spent roughly $3 million on phases, and we realized that more phases might be necessary, and that's what we're taking the next step.
It started out with what, something like 27 homes had water problems? We've got it
Most
down
of
to
the
8 now.
subdivision.
And we're still working on it. And all of the residents in there, including myself, pay $400 a year extra on their taxes, even those that don't have water problems, to try and help those that do. It's been an ongoing thing for years. We've lived with, and it's affected our property values. It's affected a lot of stuff in there. But the board continues to work on it.
Well, kind of just going back to what Sean was saying, how do there's a level of tiers where people come in and they approve work.
Right.
People are licensed and bonded, they
But I
come in,
mean,
they do stuff, you go in, you
again,
buy a
she's-
home and you hope for the best, and.
Yeah, people build homes in water, on water, on stilts. It can be done. It's just that it's got to be done properly, and obviously there's an issue. And the thing is, from the fields, because these all butt up to farmland, there's probably, I believe, an aquifer or something that's running water constantly.
Yeah, we all live on farmland.
So
Right.
it's just something that unfortunately comes up once in a while, and ultimately, that's why I said, down the road, there may have to be a discussion about, do the houses need to be knocked down?
I guess I'm just hoping not to see her again in 2
Oh,
years.
no, I
And
totally.
you guys are still trying to figure this out for
She
the
has,
15 years
has
later.
all of my empathy.
She's dying from some mold.
I get it.
And we continue to monitor, correct? We
Yeah.
have all the time, we're monitoring, communicating.
Yeah, our PW's going out there on a daily basis looking at stuff, so.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, staff reports. Any questions for staff? There's a tricky snowstorm out between the slush and then the quick freeze.
Yes, it was.
You guys seem to get the streets cleared early enough for the deep freeze.
Yes, they did. We knew that we were facing the clock and the temperature drop, and anything that wasn't scraped or salted was going to turn to a block of ice. So our guys worked diligently to stay ahead of it.
Well, thank you. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Trustee reports, Jen?
I have nothing, thank you.
Okay. Ryan? Nothing. Rick?
Nothing.
Sean?
Nothing.
Ted?
Nothing.
Heidi?
Just Girl Scout cookie season's here.
Have you sampled the new flavor?
Yes, the lemon ups, they're very good. They got rid of the Spanish miles, they had the lemon ups.
Good. President's report, attended Metro West Council Mayor's breakfast meeting last week, and it was good. Brent made some good contacts regarding the Park 47 light, so put in some information, and then we got word that we made the next cut to get the grant for the planning grant, so hopefully that keeps going. And I was interviewed today by Robbie Bashwold on Channel 7, so we'll see if that goes anywhere. So, anyways. Okay, any other public comments? Yes.
Listening to these issues with Mallard Point and the water brings to mind Crown and their 8 million square feet of warehouse and the water. And I'm sure that everyone did their best with Mallard Point, and look what we got. And I would expect that everyone would at least try to do their best with whatever Crown wants to do with their property. But let's keep in mind, Mallard Point, oh yeah, this is fine, it will be fine. And it isn't, and it wasn't. And I don't know whether we should place the blame on anybody, that wouldn't do any good at this point. But when Crown talks about developing their property, and that development with 8 million square feet of warehouse, and where was the water going to go? And no one seemed to care. Well, let's talk about Mallard Point the next time that Crown brings up their plan. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Yeah. I can answer part of that. It seems like Mr. Olson from Crown is on the Kane County Stormwater Technical Advisory Committee.
That's a conflict of interest.
Along with Jennifer Cowan, who is with Crown Development. So they might have something, you might be able to ask them what could be happening there. Only thing I want to say is that maybe I'm misunderstand, but I heard a comment earlier that the board was to serve to protect Sugar Grove and economic viability going forward. It seems that over the course of the past year, there's been a lot of information, and what the board sees is that they're going to be in financial stress going forward, and that the TIF solution is the only way out. It's the only way you're going to get development here. I don't know, that could be argued either way. As TIP 1, as we said, it was 8 years, $9 million that you said was put into the roads. It's not repaid yet. So if you just look at that, it hasn't been that successful. You could say maybe partially, I don't know. TIP 2 is coming now. It's going to create development. I don't know. We haven't seen that yet. It could be 8 years, and we could be looking at the same situation again. But what I thought was the responsibility of the trustees was to represent its constituents and what they wanted. From what I understood is that the last election was a mandate for 3 new trustees that were elected by a group of people within the community that really, it wasn't just Crown. I think the statement was they didn't want an industrial development going in the community. And that could be clarified by actually doing a referendum before you move ahead with some of these projects and just assuming that there's 7 of you that are representing what the people actually want, put this out in a referendum with the next election and see what the people really want. Give them a chance to speak. So unless I'm misunderstanding, that's kind of what that last election was about. There was a mandate by the electorate that didn't want Crown, didn't want industrial development and all that went with it. And the percentages for the people that were elected were the same percentages as the previous elections. I think your vote in 17 was 683 votes, which was 10.4% of registered voters in Sugar Grove. If you assume that those are mandates, then you have to kind of reflect on what the last election said by the people. So maybe consider a referendum before we do any major changes coming forward with the Crown property and whatever. And then the other thing I noticed was, I think it was November 19th that Brent said that they had been contacted for a data center, possible data center development. Is that right?
I don't know about the date, but we should.
Well, it's on the agenda here. I believe that was it. And then in the newspaper on the 20th, it says right here, trustees, Sugar Grove Community Development Director Walter Medviar said the village was recently a finalist in the site selection, but ultimately not selected due to a number of shortcomings. So that was kind of a quick turnaround. Maybe I'm confused on this, but it's in the paper. And it says that they said the number of shortcomings that the village may want to consider addressing in order to attract this use in the future. So, and it said here the issue of water is key, and so on and so forth. So I'm confused as, was there really a possibility of these people coming, or was it just, I don't get the reason for it. If it was just to set up some changes in the future to make it easier to get a special permit issued, or I think that was your statement in the paper. That so am I wrong about that, the timing, or what? When were you officially notified that they weren't going to go forward?
I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's reflected in whatever documents you're looking at there when you got the notice.
Okay, all right. Well, I was just struck by that, why he would announce that there was an interest in November around the 19th, and then on the 20th they published in the paper that they weren't interested. So, anyway,
okay.
That's it.
Any public or any airport report?
Yes. We are planning on having a meeting with a couple of staff members to talk about the sewer onto the airport. Tony, I think, has already sent information over to the engineering firm that is developing, or looking at developing that property to make it, see if it's feasible. As you know, the airport only relies on Aurora for their tax revenue. It's not enough. DuPage Airport has the whole county. Most airports have a larger tax base. Aurora really doesn't have a large enough tax base to finance their airport, so it's pretty much pay as you go and self-financing with some tax dollars from Aurora. So the sewer treatment plant, if it could be run out there, would be great for the growth of the airport. It could expand the airport quite a bit. And even Aurora probably shakes their head why they put it out there, because they say Sugar Grove gets more of a benefit from the airport than Aurora does. With the surrounding businesses and things like that, you've got some restaurants, even though they're fast food and hardware store and things like that. But you do have businesses that are benefiting from the daytime population at the airport, which is considerable. So I hope that, I think I've been on the airport for about 15 years, and I've been on basically because I think that the airport's eventually beneficial to the village and financially beneficial. So that's been my help.
Thank you. No, carried. Message back and forth between the village to the airport and vice versa, so it's been greatly
I would like to say something about Crown. Crown's not going to go away. Crown has held that property for 20 years, and they're going to keep it. Now, they probably wait for the next election before they really start in serious negotiations. And if they can't negotiate, they'll go to Elburn. And don't think Elburn wouldn't someday do it, because they will. So that property is going to be developed. Now, you know, I would rather not see warehouses there. But you've got to come up with some ideas. You've got to be in communication with them. They are not your enemy. They are not bad people. They are people that want to make a buck. And that's all it is. It's just like, you're all business people. You deal the same way with your businesses and people. You know what it's about. It's about the money. And they're not going to walk away from the money. They're just going to see what you got to offer. It's going to be difficult to negotiate with them. Yes, but it's possible. Because if you have some ideas where you both can make money, they will wheel and deal with you. So you can't just, I know we sent a message that we as a community hate them. But you got to get over that issue of hatred and distrust and everything else. It's just like any other corporation. You're going to deal with them someday, so you might as well start learning to communicate with them and deal with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, is there a need to go to executive session? Okay. May I get a motion to adjourn? Motion. All in favor, state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you all.